Subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. Hey, it's Adam Toporek, customer service expert, author, and speaker, and I want to talk to you today about a concept that very few customer experience, customer service experts talk about, because it's one of the most challenging ones there is. And that's that all great customer experiences begin with adequate resources. And what that means is if you don't have the resources in place, it doesn't matter how good your training is, it doesn't matter how good your staff is, your journey map, all of these things that we always talk about, if you don't have the resources in place. Now, what are those resources? One, human. Okay, if you don't have the human resources in place, if you have 5 people doing the job of 8, we've all been understaffed, right? I come from retail. 2 people would call out, and all of a sudden we're 30%, 40%, 50% of our staffing. Are we going to deliver the customer experiences we could if we were at 100%? Of course not. You simply can't do it. And this is one of the things behind customer experience today, because ever since the crash, large companies have found ways to cut staff, and they found ways to have their staff do more, to have their staff take on more responsibility, and everybody's doing the jobs of 2 or 3 or 4 people in some cases. I talked to some frontline reps, and they are just doing the jobs that 3 people used to do. And how well can they do that job? How can they service, 300 people, 300 accounts when they used to service 100 accounts, and that was a full-time job, and that was sort of the limits of where they could be to deliver the customer experience at the level they want. So resources can be more than just human too. I mean, they can simply be, do you have the product in stock? Do you have the bandwidth or the service ability or the hours that your customers want for the experience? Are you able to staff the hours that they want? So a lot of companies, they turn on the phone at 8 a.m. and they shut it off at 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., whatever it may be. But maybe that's an industry where the customers may want 24-hour service. And that doesn't always, 1 customer, 2 customers, a handful, a small percentage of customers are always going to want some set of boundaries that are past what is sort of practical for your business model. So that's okay. That's going to happen. You can't set up your whole business around exceptions. But if you're doing it because you simply don't have the resources, if your hours are dictated by a lack of resources as opposed to a lack of demand, right? If your staffing, if your ability to service multi-channels is about a lack of resources and not instead of a lack of demand, then that's where you have to start looking at it. And you can't be all things to all people. For instance, I'm small business, small team, B2B. We're not going to be omni-channel. I'm not going to monitor every channel 24/7. It's just not practical in this business, nor is it necessary. But if you're FedEx and you're sending packages all night long and all day long and 24/7, and they are top priority, they're time sensitive, then you're going to want to be monitoring your main channels all the time. Do you have the resources in place to do that? And too often when we talk about customer experience, when we talk about the journey map, we forget to look at it through the lens of resources. We obviously sort of tacitly acknowledge, okay, we need to staff up. We need to make sure we're overstaffed for the holiday, right, in retail, which I come from. But what we don't talk about is the reality of, okay, how does our experience get affected when we're short-staffed? Because we're always short-staffed, right? I mean, every company deals with that at some point, and most likely they deal with it regularly because we don't overstaff in most cases. Very few companies overstaff, and if they do, often that's on a temporary basis when there's a rush expected. Very few companies, because of the drag on profitability, overstaff consistently. So when we look at it, we have to look at, okay, what does our experience look like when we're understaffed? What does our experience look like when we are unable to provide, let's say, the inventory we need in the time frame we need it? And what does that experience look like? And what do we do? What are our contingency plans? What is our training around that? What do we do to support the reps that are in the field? If you look at, this is May 2017, we're doing this, so a month or so ago, Delta had a huge issue. Their computers just went on the fritz. Everything got backed up. There were some delays, just cascading delays, and it went on for like a week, and it was a mess. So the question is, when something like that happens, and that was in extreme circumstances, but let's say a minor version of something like that happens, what are our contingency plans? And one, how do we know what our sort of resource view is going to be in these situations? And how are we going to support and allocate the resources we do have, even if they aren't adequate, for maximum effectiveness? Because in the end, like I said at the beginning of the video, no matter what you do, training, experience design, the ultimate journey map, the best journey map that's ever been created for a customer experience, if you don't have the resources in place to deliver it the way you want to, then you're not going to be able to deliver the customer experience that is, one, your goal, and two, that's going to be what the customer wants, and that's going to wow them and make them want to come back and be retained. So resources are a tricky business because there's a big profitability aspect to it. There's a lot of silo issues and whose budget line gets what. But you just need to know that when you're thinking about customer experience, if you're not looking at it from a resource standpoint and also a standpoint of resources not being at full, then you're really going to be doing a disservice to the experience, and all of the other work you're putting into the experience can be easily thrown away by this one dynamic. So I encourage you to think about customer experience through the lens of resources. Of course, try to make sure you always have the resources in place, whether they be human, capital, whatever it may be, inventory, you name it. Try to anticipate the experience, anticipate demand as much as you can, and have these things in place because they really do impact the customer experience. And if that's your driver, that's your competitive differentiator, which for most companies it should be nowadays, then resource allocation and resource sufficiency is going to be a huge part of it. Well, I'm Adam Deport. You can find out more about me at customersthatstick.com. And of course, we are here on YouTube. So subscribe. Thanks so much.